For the warm-up, we're going to use quadratic formula to solve for x. In other words, we're going to find the zeros of the quadratic. We're also going to use a graphing calculator to graph the function and sketch the graph. So let's take a look at our quadratic formula right here. It's a quadratic because x squared is the highest power. There's 0 on one side. So yesterday we practiced the quadratic formula. The first step is to identify a, b, and c. A is the number next to the x squared. B is the number next to the x, so here it's -4, and C is the number by itself here, -21. So for quadratic formula, the first step is to plug in. We have x equals opposite b. The opposite of -4 is 4, plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac. Here a is 1 again, and c is -21. All over 2a. So here's how I want to see your first step here. Well, I want to see a, b, and c, and that you can plug in. And then I want you to calculate these three numbers separately. So we have x equals 4 plus or minus the square root. And you should be able to type this in with those parentheses and get the number. So here's what it would look like. So we'd have -4 squared minus 4 parentheses 1 parentheses -21, and we get 100. So I'd want to see that number here, 100, all over 2 times 1, which is 2. And then we can split it up and solve. So first we have x equals 4 plus the square root of 10, which is, or square root of 100, which is 10, divided by 2. And we have 4 minus the square root of 100, which is 10, divided by 2. So 10 plus 4 is 14. 14 divided by 2 is 7. And 4 minus 10 is -6. -6 divided by 2 is -3. So these are the x-intercepts with the zeros of the quadratic. If we were to sketch it, it might look something like this. So at 7, there's a 0. At -3, there's a 0. And we would have our quadratic. On the graphing calculator, to graph it, we can go to the scratch pad graph or open a graph page. We'll do x squared minus 4x minus 21. And we can see that at 7 there's a 0, and at -3 there's a 0. So today during class, we're going to look at something called the discriminant. The discriminant is the thing under the square root sign. So here's the square root sign in quadratic formula. The discriminant is the b squared minus 4ac. So it's this number underneath the square root sign. In class today, we're going to use quadratic formula to find the zeros. We're going to split up the work. We're going to record how many zeros each function has. We're going to sketch the function. We're going to classify them by the number of zeros and then look for a pattern. What's the relationship between this discriminant, this number here, and the number of zeros or roots or solutions of the function? So when I say find the answer, the solution, the zeros, the roots, it means the same thing. It means where does it cross the x-axis. So in class we're going to look at 6 different quadratics and classify them and answer this question. What is the relationship between the discriminant and the number of zeros, roots, or solutions of the function? So in class, as we explore, this is what we will discover. Okay, so the first thing is, if our discriminant, the thing under the square root sign, so I'm going to do all my square root here. So remember the discriminant is that b squared minus 4ac. If that discriminant is positive, so positive discriminant, like the warm-up. The warm-up we had a discriminant of 100. This is the discriminant 100. If it's positive, there are 2 answers. So here's what it will mean. You have 2 solutions. Solutions also mean zeros or roots. And your graph could look something like this, where you have a parabola that crosses your x-axis twice. If you get 0 for your discriminant here, you will have one solution, because if you have a number plus or minus 0, it doesn't matter about the plus or minus. And your graph might look something like this, where it touches your x-axis only once. And if your discriminant is negative, right now we can't take the square root of a negative number because there's no number times itself that's negative. So there's going to be 0 real solutions. And that graph could look something like this, where it doesn't touch the x-axis right here. So on today's assignment, we're going to take a look at these, and if it has a discriminant, a positive discriminant, 2 answers, 0 discriminant, 1 solution, and negative discriminant, 0 real solutions.